The click of the gold clasp was deafening in the sterile silence of the limousine. Alistair Finch stared at the watch nestled in his palm, its mother-of-pearl face gleaming under the passing streetlights. It was Eleanor's, delicate, timeless, and broken. It had stopped ticking at 3:14 a.m., the exact moment she had left him, and the silence had been mocking him for 6 insufferable months. Take me somewhere. Unpleasant. He'd ordered his driver, a man named Marcus, who had learned long ago not to ask questions. Now, parked in a rain-slicked alley, reeking of refuse and regret, Alistair opened the door. He didn't place it in the overflowing dumpster. He threw it. The tiny, beautiful thing arced through the damp air, a shooting star of discarded memory, before landing with a pathetic clatter against a heap of sodden cardboard. He didn't watch it settle. He just got back in the car, the scent of wet asphalt and decay clinging to his cashmere coat, leaving a fortune in gold and grief to be swallowed by the city's grime. The heavy door of the Maybach sealed him back inside his silent, opulent tomb. Home, Marcus. His voice was gravel, a sound as broken as the treasure he'd just abandoned. Hours later, as the faintest hint of dawn threatened the bruised purple sky, a different kind of vehicle navigated the city's forgotten arteries. It was a bicycle, its frame a patchwork of rust and mismatched paint, its tires thin and worn. A small figure in an oversized raincoat pedaled with a steady, determined rhythm, a large canvas bag slung over her shoulder. This was Lily. At 10 years old, she was an expert in the city's secret language. The rattle of a loose grate, the groan of a restaurant's back door swinging open, the specific thud of a dumpster being filled. Her route was a map of possibilities, a treasure hunt where treasure could be a half-eaten loaf of bread, a bundle of recyclable cans, or a textbook with a barely cracked spine. The St. Jude's Home for Children provided a roof and a cot, but it couldn't provide the small things that made life feel like her own. For those, she had her route. The alley behind the Grand Meridian Hotel was often a gold mine of discarded linens and slightly imperfect, but still edible, pastries. Tonight, however, the rain had turned everything into a soupy mess. Disappointment pricked at her, cold and sharp as the drizzle seeping through her worn sneakers. She was about to leave when a glint of light, impossibly bright in the gloom, caught her eye. It was a flicker from a pile of wet boxes, a tiny star that had fallen to earth. She hopped off her bike, her heart giving a hopeful little flutter. She knelt, pushing aside a soggy newspaper, and her breath caught in her throat. There, lying on the stained cardboard, was the watch. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The band was made of intricately woven gold, like spun sunlight, and the face was a luminous pearl that seemed to shift and shimmer with its own internal light. It was elegant, heavy, and achingly sad in its new, filthy home. She picked it up with a reverence usually reserved for the fragile nests of birds she sometimes found in the park. The glass was cracked, a tiny spiderweb fracture over the number 3, and the delicate hands were still, broken, just like everything else good in this alley. But as she held it, a strange warmth spread through her fingers, a faint hum of a life lived and a story waiting to be told. She carefully wiped the grime from its face with the hem of her sleeve, her small fingers tracing the cold, unmoving hands. She didn't see a piece of trash. She saw a puzzle, a heart that had stopped beating, and with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, she knew she had to make it beat again. She tucked it into the driest pocket of her coat, a secret treasure against her chest, and pedaled away from the alley, unaware that she was carrying the ghost of a billionaire's love in her pocket. Back at St. Jude's, the world was a cacophony of snores, coughs, and the distant rumble of the boiler in the basement. Lily didn't go to the girls' dormitory. Instead, she slipped into a small, forgotten utility closet under the main staircase. This was her workshop, her sanctuary. The space was barely big enough for her to sit cross-legged, but it was hers. A single, low-wattage bulb dangled from the ceiling, illuminating her collection of treasures. A set of eyeglass screwdrivers, scavenged from a dumpster behind an optometrist's office. A pair of delicate tweezers she'd traded a week's worth of dessert for, a magnifying glass with a chip in the lens, and an assortment of tiny gears, springs, and screws, organized in old matchboxes. Here, she was not Lily, the orphan. She was Lily, the horologist, the surgeon of time. She laid a clean rag on the dusty floor and placed the watch upon it. Under the weak light, its beauty was even more staggering. She saw the microscopic scratches of a life well lived, the faint residue of perfume clinging to the clasp. Using her most delicate tools, she began her examination. The backplate was fastened with screws so minuscule they were almost invisible. It took her nearly an hour of painstaking, patient work, her tongue poking out in concentration, to finally pry it open. The sight within made her gasp. It was a universe in miniature. A breathtaking labyrinth of shimmering brass gears, ruby bearings like drops of blood, and a coiled spring that looked like a captured silver serpent. It was a Swiss movement, a masterpiece of engineering far beyond anything she had ever worked on. Her usual patients were cheap plastic alarm clocks and the occasional battered wristwatch from the lost and found. This was like comparing a child's drawing to a Rembrandt. For a moment, fear paralyzed her. What if she made it worse? What if she destroyed this perfect, tiny world? But the silence of the watch was a challenge she couldn't ignore. She took a deep breath, the scent of dust and damp concrete filling her lungs, and went to work. For days, Lily's life revolved around the watch. During the day, she went through the motions of life at the orphanage. Bland meals, rote lessons, the noisy chaos of the playground, where she always felt like an outsider. But her mind was miles away, charting the intricate pathways of gears and levers. Every night she would retreat to her closet, the city's sounds fading away as she entered the watch's tiny world. She discovered the problem was the mainspring. It was snagged, caught on a microscopic burr of metal, preventing it from uncoiling and breathing life into the mechanism. Fixing it required a touch lighter than a whisper. She spent 2 full nights just practicing on old, broken clock parts, training her fingers to perform the impossibly delicate maneuver. On the 3rd night, holding her breath until her lungs burned, she used her finest pair of tweezers to gently, so gently, nudge the spring back into its groove. There was a soft click, a sound so faint it was more felt than heard. And then a miracle. The balance wheel began to oscillate, a tiny, frantic heartbeat. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The sound was crisp, clean, and alive. It filled the tiny closet, pushing back the silence and the loneliness. Lily held the watch to her ear, tears welling in her eyes as the steady rhythm pulsed against her skin. It was working. She had done it. She had brought it back to life. With the watch now ticking, she turned her attention to its exterior. She spent another evening polishing the gold with a soft cloth until it shone with a warm, buttery light. She even managed to smooth the worst of the crack in the crystal using a fine, abrasive paste she'd created from ground chalk. As she was cleaning the inside of the clasp for the final time, her finger caught on something. A tiny, almost invisible lever. She pressed it, and a hidden compartment on the back of the watch face sprang open. Inside, protected by a sliver of glass, was not a photograph, but a minuscule, exquisitely detailed engraving. It was a single star anise, the 8-pointed star-shaped spice. Beneath it, etched in a flowing, elegant script, were 3 words, "My constant star." Lily stared at the inscription, a wave of profound sadness washing over her. This wasn't just a watch. It was a universe of love and memory, condensed into a single, beautiful object. Someone had loved the owner of this watch very, very much, and someone, for a reason she couldn't possibly fathom, had thrown it all away. The joy of her achievement was now tangled with a heavy sense of responsibility. This watch didn't belong in her closet. It belonged to its story. It had to go home. Alistair Finch moved through his life like a ghost, haunting the hallowed halls of his own success. He chaired board meetings with a glacial detachment, his mind 1,000 miles away. He approved billion-dollar mergers without a flicker of emotion, the numbers on the screen as meaningless as dust motes dancing in a sunbeam. His penthouse, a glass-walled palace overlooking the city, felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Every surface was sterile, every object curated for its aesthetic value rather than any personal meaning. He had systematically purged the space of Eleanor. Her books were gone, her vibrant paintings replaced with cold, abstract art, her favorite armchair relegated to a storage unit. He thought that by erasing the evidence of her, he could excise the pain of her absence. But grief was not an object to be discarded. It was a phantom limb, an ache for something that was no longer there. The act of throwing away her watch had not been a release. It had been a desecration. He expected to feel lighter, unburdened. Instead, a new, heavier guilt had settled in its place. He found himself thinking about it at odd moments. The memory of its delicate weight in his palm, the way it arced through the filthy air. He saw it in his nightmares, lying in the mud, its pearlescent face staring up at him like a blind, accusing eye. Eleanor had given it to him on their 10th anniversary. He had been the one who had it customized. "Why a star, Anis?" she had asked, her laughter like wind chimes. "Because," he'd whispered, tracing the 8 points on her wrist, "no matter which way you turn, which direction you go, you always point the way home. You are my constant star." He had thrown away his compass. He was adrift, and for the first time in his life, the vast ocean of his wealth felt like it was going to drown him. One afternoon, his assistant, a sharp, perceptive woman named Clara, who had been with him for 15 years, entered his office. "Mr. Finch, the preliminary reports for the Blackwood development are on your desk." He stared out the window, his jaw tight. "Fine." Clara hesitated. "Sir, are you all right?" Alistair turned slowly, his eyes cold and empty. "I am the head of a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise, Clara. I am always all right." "With respect, sir," she said, her voice softening, "you haven't been all right since Mrs. Finch passed. This is different. This is a coldness I haven't seen before. It's not grief. It's..." an absence. He wanted to fire her. He wanted to scream at her to get out, to mind her own business. But he couldn't summon the energy. He just turned back to the window. The Blackwood deal is important, Clara. See to it. The Blackwood development was his latest obsession, a ruthless project to acquire and demolish a dozen blocks of low-income housing and derelict warehouses to build a state-of-the-art tech campus. It was a brutal, efficient plan that would displace thousands of people. In his current state, he felt a perverse satisfaction in its destructive power. If his world was broken, why shouldn't theirs be? It was on one of the architectural plans, under the heading Properties for Compulsory Purchase, that he saw the name, St. Jude's Home for Children. He felt a flicker of something, a distant echo of Eleanor's voice chastising him. But he crushed it, burying it under the cold, hard logic of profit and progress. Finding the owner of the watch was a far greater challenge than fixing it. Lily had no name, only the inscription, "My Constant Star." She knew it was a long shot, but she had to try. Her first stop was the library, a place that felt as sacred to her as her workshop. She spent hours poring over books on jewelry and watchmaking, hoping to identify the maker's mark. She eventually found it, a tiny stylized Vaissy for Vacheron Constantin. The book described them as one of the oldest and most prestigious watchmakers in the world, their creations costing more than the entire St. Jude's building. A cold knot of fear formed in her stomach. This wasn't just a nice watch. It was a treasure. The kind of thing people might do bad things to get. This knowledge only strengthened her resolve. Whoever owned it must be desperate to have it back. Her quest took her to the city's jewelry district, a glittering row of shops with intimidating security guards. Door after door, she was turned away, a small, scruffy girl clutching a story too incredible to be believed. "Go on, kid. Beat it," one jeweler grumbled, barely glancing up from his polishing cloth. "We don't deal with whatever this is." Finally, an old man in a dusty, cluttered shop, his eyes magnified by a jeweler's loupe, took pity on her. He listened to her story, his expression shifting from skepticism to wonder as she showed him the watch. He examined the movement, his breath a low whistle of admiration. "My child," he said, his voice raspy, "this is not just a watch. This is art. The engraving is custom, of course, untraceable." He paused, looking at her earnest, hopeful face. "But a piece like this, it is sold to a certain kind of clientele, people of immense wealth, the kind of people who live in the clouds, not on the streets." He pointed a trembling finger towards the skyline, where one building pierced the heavens higher than all the others. Finch Tower. "That is where I would start looking," he said. "People say the man who owns that building owns the city." Finch Tower was a fortress of glass and steel, a monument to power and untouchability. For Lily, it was more intimidating than any dragon's lair. She spent a day just watching it, observing the flow of expensive suits and luxury cars, the impassive faces of the security guards. She tried the front entrance, the watch wrapped carefully in a cloth in her pocket. She was stopped before she even reached the revolving doors. "Can I help you, miss?" a guard asked, his voice polite but firm, his eyes cataloging her worn clothes and frayed backpack. I need to see Mr. Finch," she stammered. The guard's expression didn't change, but a flicker of amusement crossed his eyes. "I'm afraid Mr. Finch doesn't take unscheduled appointments. Do you have a contact?" "No, but it's important. I found something of his." "You can leave it with security," he said, already turning his attention to a sleek black car pulling up to the curb. No, Lily insisted, her voice small but determined. I have to give it to him myself. The guard sighed, his patience wearing thin. Listen, kid, go home. This isn't a playground. Defeated, she retreated, but she didn't give up. For the next 2 days, she tried every angle. She tried the service entrance, only to be chased away by a furious chef. She tried blending in with a group of couriers, but her small size and lack of a uniform gave her away. The tower remained impenetrable. She felt a growing desperation. The watch in her pocket felt heavier each day, its steady ticking a constant reminder of her mission. On the 3rd day, she had an idea. It was a stupid, reckless idea, but it was all she had left. She knew from her scavenging that buildings like this had immense trash compactors in the sublevels. She also knew that the disposal crews came at 4 a.m., the same time the night security shift was at its drowsiest. She found the loading bay, a cavernous concrete space reeking of garbage and disinfectant. Hiding behind a stack of empty pallets, she waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. When the garbage truck rumbled in, its backup beeper echoing through the bay, she saw her chance. While the driver and the building's custodian were busy hooking up the massive dumpster, she slipped through a propped open door, melting into the shadows of the building's cavernous underbelly. The interior of Finch Tower was a sterile, labyrinthine world of concrete corridors and humming machinery. Lily moved like a ghost, following the signs for the executive elevators. She knew she was on borrowed time. Every whir of a security camera, every footstep in a distant hallway, made her jump. She finally found the bank of private elevators, reserved for the executive floors. There was no one there. She pressed the button for the penthouse, her small finger trembling. The doors slid open with a silent, expensive whoosh. As the elevator ascended, the city unfolded beneath her, a breathtaking tapestry of lights. It was a world away from her closet under the stairs. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse suite. The space was vast, cold, and achingly empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city, but inside there was no warmth, no life. It was like a magazine photo, beautiful and unreal. And then she saw him. Alistair Finch was standing by the window, his back to her, a silhouette against the glittering skyline. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, his posture rigid with a tension that filled the enormous room. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, not even turning around. "How did you get in here?" Lily's courage almost failed her. He was just a man, but he felt like a king, and she was an intruder in his castle. She took a deep breath, clutching the watch in her pocket. "My name is Lily," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I found something that belongs to you." He turned then, his eyes sweeping over her with a cold, dismissive glance. His face was handsome, but etched with a deep, weary sorrow that made him look older than he probably was. "Security has a lost and found," he said, his tone laced with irritation. "You should not be here." "No," she insisted, taking a step forward. "I had to give it to you, in person." She pulled the watch from her pocket. The polished gold caught the light, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Alistair's face. It wasn't recognition or relief. It was a dark, visceral anger. "Where did you get that?" he snarled, taking a menacing step towards her. "I found it. In an alley. It was broken, but I fixed it." She held it out to him, an offering of peace, a return of a lost treasure. The soft, steady ticking filled the silence between them. He stared at the watch, then at her grimy, hopeful face. His expression hardened into a mask of pure contempt. He saw a street urchin, a grifter looking for a handout. He imagined her finding it, perhaps even breaking it herself, dreaming up this elaborate story to extort money from him. "I threw that piece of garbage away because I didn't want it," he said, his voice dripping with ice. "It is worthless to me. Now take it and get out of my building before I have you arrested for trespassing." Lily flinched as if he had slapped her. The cruelty in his voice was a physical blow. She looked down at the watch in her hand, the beautiful object she had poured her heart into, the symbol of a love she could only dream of, and saw it through his eyes. Garbage. Her own tears welled up, hot and bitter. "It's not garbage," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "It has an engraving. It says, 'My constant star.' Someone loved you very much." The words hit Alistair like a physical shock. He staggered back a step, his face paling. He had forgotten about the engraving. For a moment the mask slipped, revealing a raw, profound agony beneath. He saw Eleanor's face, heard her laughter. The pain was so intense, so unexpected, that it immediately curdled back into rage. It was a rage directed at this small, insignificant girl who had dared to dredge up the one thing he was trying so desperately to bury. "Get out!" he roared, his voice cracking. "Now!" He turned his back on her, unable to look at her, at the watch, at the ghost she had so carelessly resurrected. Lily stood there for a moment, stunned and heartbroken. The ticking of the watch seemed to mock her. She had thought she was doing something good, something right. She had thought she was returning a piece of someone's heart. But he didn't want it. He had thrown the heart away and was angry that she had brought it back. With a sob, she turned and fled, running back to the elevator, leaving the billionaire alone in his vast, empty kingdom, with the echo of a ticking watch that was no longer there. After Lily was gone, a profound, suffocating silence descended on the penthouse. Alistair stood frozen, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of a marble console table. The girl's words echoed in the cavernous space. "My constant star." He hadn't thought of that phrase in months. He had locked it away in the deepest, darkest vault of his memory, along with the scent of Eleanor's hair and the warmth of her hand in his. This child, this grimy little intruder, had picked the lock with effortless innocence. His rage began to subside, leaving behind the cold, familiar dregs of shame. He hadn't seen a child trying to do a good deed. He had seen a threat, an emotional extortionist. He had looked at her and seen only a reflection of his own ugliness, his own failure to protect the memory of his wife. He sank into a chair, the pristine Italian leather sighing under his weight. What had he become? Eleanor had been the light of his life, his moral compass. She was the one who championed charities, who volunteered at soup kitchens, who saw the humanity in every person, regardless of their station. She would have been appalled. She would have knelt down, looked that little girl in the eye, and thanked her with a warmth that could melt glaciers. She would have invited her in for hot chocolate and listened to her story. He, on the other hand, had threatened to have her arrested. The thought was a dagger in his gut. The watch. He had called it garbage. He remembered the pride in the girl's voice when she'd said, "I fixed it." She hadn't just found it, she had healed it. She had restored the heartbeat he had so callously tried to silence. He closed his eyes, and an image of the watch, arcing through the filthy alley air, flashed in his mind. He had thrown away more than a piece of jewelry that night. He had thrown away the last tangible piece of Eleanor's love, and a part of his own soul along with it. A wave of regret, so powerful it was physically nauseating, washed over him. He had to find her. He had to apologize. He had to get the watch back. He buzzed his intercom, his voice hoarse. "Clara, get in here." Clara entered to find a scene that startled her. Alistair Finch, a man she had only ever seen as impeccably composed, was slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, looking utterly broken. "Sir?" she asked, her professional demeanor softening with genuine concern. "There was a girl here," he said, his voice muffled. "About 10 years old. Scruffy. Dark hair. She was in this office just a few minutes ago. I need you to find her. Now." Clara's eyebrows shot up. "A child? In the penthouse? How did she get past security?" "I don't know, and I don't care," he snapped, his composure returning in a flash of his old authority. "Scour the security footage from every camera in the building for the last hour. Main entrance, service bays, elevators, everything. I want her name. I want her address. I want to know everything about her. Use every resource we have. I don't care what it costs." For the next few hours, Finch Tower's formidable security apparatus was mobilized for a purpose it was never designed for: to find one small, lost girl. Security teams reviewed hours of footage, their sharp eyes scanning for a flash of an oversized raincoat. Clara coordinated the effort, her efficiency masking a deep curiosity about what this was all about. They finally found her. A grainy image from a service corridor camera, a small figure slipping through a door left ajar. Then another, clearer shot from an elevator camera, her face streaked with tears as she descended. The last image they had was of her emerging from the loading bay, hopping onto a beat-up bicycle, and disappearing into the pre-dawn city. She was a ghost. There was no facial recognition match in any database, no way to track the unregistered bicycle. She had vanished as completely as she had appeared. "We've lost her, sir," Clara reported, her voice laced with apology. "The trail goes cold at the corner of 5th and Grand. She could have gone anywhere from there." Alistair stared at the frozen image of Lily's face on the monitor, a single, perfect tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. The sight was like a physical blow. That tear was his fault. "No," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We haven't lost her. Broaden the search. Check every orphanage, every group home, every school in a 5-mile radius of that intersection. Show her picture. Someone must know who she is." He was a man who built empires, who bent markets to his will. He would not be defeated by this. Finding this girl was no longer just about the watch. It had become a penance. Lily pedaled home in a blur of tears and rain. The city lights smeared and danced before her eyes. The cold from the damp air seeped into her bones, but it was nothing compared to the ice in her chest. His words echoed in her head. Garbage. Worthless. She had never felt so small, so naive. She had flown to the sun, and he had burned her wings without a second thought. She didn't go back to the closet workshop. She went straight to the dormitory, crept into her cot, and pulled the thin blanket over her head. The watch was still in her pocket, its ticking a tiny, insistent accusation. She pulled it out, the polished gold feeling cold and alien in her hand. She had poured so much of herself into it, so much hope. And for what? For a man so rich he could throw away a treasure and not even feel its loss. The anger came then, hot and sharp, burning away her tears. It wasn't fair. Nothing was fair. She wanted to throw the watch herself, to smash it against the brick wall, to silence its perfect, mocking heartbeat forever. But she couldn't. Looking at its luminous face, she didn't see the cruel billionaire anymore. She saw the love in the inscription. She felt the history in its delicate mechanics. The watch wasn't his, not really. He had forfeited his right to it when he discarded it in the trash. It was hers now. It was the finest thing she had ever owned, the only beautiful thing in her life that wasn't scavenged refuse. She had earned it. She had saved it. She slipped it onto her own thin wrist. The heavy gold band was loose, but it felt right. It was a secret armor, a silent promise to herself that she was not worthless, that she could fix broken things, that she had value, even if the world didn't see it. The ticking against her pulse was a comfort, a tiny, steady companion in the dark. Days turned into a week. Alistair's search for the mystery girl turned up nothing. His teams visited dozens of institutions, but no one recognized the grainy photo. It was as if she had been a mirage. His frustration grew into a cold, simmering obsession. During the day, he was more ruthless than ever, pushing the Blackwood development forward with a relentless, punishing pace. He pored over demolition schedules and zoning variances, the destructive act a welcome distraction from his own internal chaos. The name St. Jude's Home for Children appeared on document after document. He ignored it, compartmentalizing it as just another line item, another obstacle to be bulldozed. But at night, in the sterile silence of his penthouse, he would stare at the image of the girl's face and feel the crushing weight of his failure. He started doing something he hadn't done in years. He started walking. He would leave the tower late at night, dressed in simple, anonymous clothes, and just walk through the city he owned, but had never truly seen. He found himself drawn to the grittier, forgotten neighborhoods, the places he was actively trying to erase from the map. He saw the city from the ground up, not from 100 stories high. He saw the families huddled in small apartments, the street vendors selling food that smelled more like home than anything his private chef had ever made, the laughter of children playing in a cracked and faded schoolyard. He walked past St. Jude's one night. It was an old, grim-looking brick building, its windows glowing with a dim, weary light. He saw the silhouette of a woman, a caretaker, gently pulling a curtain closed in an upper-story window. For a fleeting moment, he felt a pang of something that was not profit or loss. It was a complex, uncomfortable emotion he couldn't name. He told himself it was just a building, a necessary sacrifice for progress, and walked on, the lie feeling thin and hollow in the cold night air. Meanwhile, life at St. Jude's was growing tense. Rumors of the Blackwood development had been circulating for weeks, and now official-looking notices were being posted on lampposts. The children were scared, their lives, already so precarious, now threatened with complete upheaval. The head of the home, Mrs. Gable, a woman with a perpetually worried expression and a heart bigger than the building she managed, tried to reassure them, but her own anxiety was palpable. Lily heard the whispers. She read the notices. She saw the name Finch Enterprises printed at the bottom. The man from the tower. The man who threw away beautiful things. It turned out he threw away homes, too. A new kind of anger, a protective, righteous anger, began to grow in her heart. This wasn't just about her or the watch anymore. This was about her home, her friends, the only life she knew. She looked at the watch on her wrist. It was a symbol of his world, a world of careless, destructive power. But it was also a symbol of her world, a world of patience, repair, and reclamation. She had fixed his broken treasure. Maybe, just maybe, she could fix his broken plans. She didn't know how, but the thought took root. The ticking on her wrist was no longer just a comfort. It was a countdown. She started watching the men in suits who came to survey the neighborhood. She listened to their conversations from her hiding spots. She learned words like eminent domain and rezoning. She gathered information like she gathered spare parts, tucking it away, waiting to see how it all fit together. One afternoon, she saw him, not from a distance, but up close. Alistair Finch himself was there, standing across the street with a group of architects, pointing at St. Jude's, his expression as cold and hard as the concrete under his expensive shoes. He didn't see her, a small girl sitting on the steps, half hidden by a pillar. But she saw him, and on her wrist, hidden beneath the cuff of her sleeve, a tiny golden heart kept perfect, steady time. The sight of him, standing there like a general planning an invasion, solidified Lily's resolve. Fear and awe were replaced by a cold, clear purpose. He was not a god in a glass tower. He was just a man, a broken man, who was trying to break everything around him. And she had something of his. Not just the watch, but a piece of his story, a secret he thought he had buried. Her plan began to form, a desperate, audacious gamble. The city was planning a public forum about the Blackwood development, a token gesture to allow the community to voice their concerns before the final approvals were rubber-stamped. Lily knew it was a sham, a piece of political theater, but it was also a stage, and it was the only one she had access to. For the next week, she prepared. She went back to the old jeweler, the only adult who had shown her kindness, and asked him to write something down for her. An appraisal. He examined the watch again, scribbled some figures on a piece of paper, and looked at her with worried eyes. "Be careful, little bird," he warned. "Men who can afford a watch like this do not like to be embarrassed." She also spent hours in the library, not reading about gears and springs, but about Alistair Finch. She read articles about his business triumphs, his ruthless tactics, and, in older, yellowed newspaper clippings, about his wife, Eleanor Finch, the celebrated philanthropist, the patron of the arts, the woman who had chaired the fundraising committee for the city's largest children's hospital. The articles painted a picture of two different people, the man she had met and the man he had once been, when his constant star was by his side. The night of the public forum, the high school auditorium was packed. Residents, activists, and small business owners filled the seats, their faces a mixture of anger, fear, and resignation. On the stage, behind a long table, sat the city council members, and at the center, Alistair Finch. He looked bored, impatient, radiating an aura of power that sucked the oxygen out of the room. One by one, people approached the microphone to plead their case. A woman whose family had owned a bakery for 3 generations spoke with tears in her eyes. An old man talked about the community garden that would be paved over. They were passionate, eloquent, and utterly hopeless. Alistair and the council listened with feigned politeness, their expressions unchanging. Their minds were already made up. Finally, the moderator announced, "We have time for one last speaker." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She slipped out of her seat and walked towards the aisle. She was so small that at first no one noticed her, but as she walked steadily towards the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. Heads turned. A murmur rippled through the auditorium. Alistair looked up from his notes, his eyes narrowing in irritation at the interruption. Then he saw her. His blood ran cold. It was the girl. The ghost he had been hunting for weeks was standing 10 feet away from him, walking towards the microphone with a look of terrifying determination on her face. He felt a dizzying mix of shock, relief, and pure dread. Lily had to stand on her toes to reach the microphone. Her voice, when it came out, was small but clear, amplified by the speakers so that it filled every corner of the vast room. "My name is Lily," she began, her eyes locked on Alistair. "I live at St. Jude's Home for Children. It's one of the buildings you want to tear down." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Alistair's face was a stony mask, but she could see a flicker of panic in his eyes. He had no idea what she was going to do. "You talk about progress and the future," Lily continued, her voice gaining strength. "You say we have to tear down the old to make way for the new. Some things, I guess, are easy to throw away. Things you think are broken, or old, or worthless." Alistair's hands clenched into fists under the table. He could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, and the lenses of a dozen news cameras. But some things that look broken can be fixed. They just need someone to take the time to look inside and see what's really there. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the watch. She held it up. The stage lights caught the polished gold, and it flashed like a beacon. A collective gasp went through the audience. It was an object so clearly out of place in this setting, in the hands of this child, that it was mesmerizing. "This is a Vacheron Constantin watch," she said, her voice ringing with a confidence she didn't feel. "It is worth more than my home, and probably more than this whole auditorium. I know, because I found it." She looked directly at Alistair, her gaze unwavering. "I found it in a dumpster, where someone had thrown it away. It was broken, the glass was cracked, and the heart inside it had stopped beating." Alistair felt the room begin to spin. This couldn't be happening. He wanted to stand up, to shout, to have security drag her off the stage, but he was paralyzed. He was trapped in the spotlight of his own public forum, a king being held hostage by a pauper. "But I fixed it," Lily said, a note of pride in her voice. "I opened it up, and I fixed it. And when I did, I found a secret." She held the watch close to the microphone. "It has an inscription. I want to read it to you." Alistair wanted to cease to exist. He wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "It says," Lily read, her voice echoing through the silent hall, "My constant star." The phrase, so intimate, so full of love and history, felt like a violation when spoken aloud in this cold public space. But it was also a revelation. The reporters in the front row began scribbling furiously. Cameras flashed. A low, shocked murmur spread through the crowd. People were putting the pieces together. The city's most ruthless billionaire, the recent widower, the custom-engraved watch, the story of it being thrown away. "The man who threw this away is the same man who wants to throw our homes away," Lily said, her voice rising with passion. "He thinks we are worthless. He thinks our community is broken. But he's wrong. We are not garbage. We are not broken beyond repair. We are just waiting for someone to see the value inside, someone to help us tick again." She laid the watch gently on the podium, its ticking now audible in the stunned silence. Then she looked back at Alistair, her eyes not filled with anger, but with a surprising, heartbreaking pity. "I don't want your watch, Mr. Finch," she said softly. "I just want my home." And with that, she turned and walked away from the microphone, leaving a trail of shattered silence and one man's soul laid bare for the entire city to see. The auditorium erupted. It wasn't loud, angry shouting, but a stunned, buzzing chaos. Reporters were swarming the stage, their cameras flashing in Alistair's face, their questions a barrage of bullets. "Mr. Finch, is the watch yours? Did you throw away your late wife's watch? What is your response to the child's accusations?" Alistair didn't hear them. He couldn't move. He was staring at the watch, lying on the podium, its golden gleam a spotlight on his shame. "My constant star." Eleanor's voice was in his head, not angry, but disappointed. He had taken their most private, sacred sentiment and, through his callousness, allowed it to become a public spectacle. He had not only dishonored her memory, he had weaponized it against himself. And a 10-year-old girl had done it with more grace and dignity than he had shown in 6 months. Clara and his security team materialized around him, forming a human shield to hustle him off the stage and out a side door, away from the ravenous press. He moved like a man in a trance, his limbs heavy, his mind a whirlwind of noise and shame. As they bundled him into his car, he caught one last glimpse of Lily. She was being hugged by Mrs. Gable, surrounded by a protective circle of their neighbors, her small face buried in the woman's coat. She was not alone. In that moment, Alistair had never felt more isolated, more utterly, crushingly alone. The drive back to the tower was silent. Clara knew better than to speak. When they arrived at the penthouse, Alistair walked to the window and stared out at the city lights, the same view that had always made him feel powerful, but now only made him feel small. The story would be everywhere by morning. The headlines were already writing themselves in his mind. Grieving billionaire's shameful secret, revealed by orphan girl. Finch's cruelty. Throws away love, throws away homes. His reputation, so carefully constructed, so ruthlessly defended, was in ruins. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he deserved it. He had spent half a year trying to outrun his grief, burying it under work and anger and destruction. But it had finally caught up to him, in the form of a small girl, with his wife's moral clarity. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark, the city glittering obliviously below, and for the first time since Eleanor died, he allowed himself to feel. He didn't just feel the pain of her loss. He felt the shame of his actions, the hollowness of his life, the staggering weight of the damage he had caused. He thought about the watch, not as an object of value, but as a vessel of memory. He remembered the day he gave it to her, the way her eyes had lit up. He remembered the feel of her wrist, the sound of her laughter. He had thrown all of that away in a fit of selfish, nihilistic rage. And Lily had found it. She had rescued it. She had understood its value in a way he had completely forgotten. She hadn't just fixed a watch. She had held up a mirror, and he was horrified by the reflection. By dawn, something inside him had shifted. The cold, hard shell he had built around his heart had been shattered, and through the cracks a sliver of light was getting in. It was the light of profound, agonizing clarity. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't about damage control or PR strategies. It was about atonement. He buzzed Clara at 6 a.m. "Cancel the Blackwood project," he said, his voice raw but firm. "Effective immediately. Issue a public statement. All contracts are void. Finch Enterprises is pulling all funding." Clara was silent for a moment, processing the tectonic shift in her employer's universe. "Sir, the financial penalties will be astronomical." "I don't care," he said. "Just do it. And one more thing. I want you to arrange a meeting with the board of St. Jude's Home for Children. I want to meet them today. And Clara, I want to make a donation." The news of the Blackwood project's cancellation hit the city like a seismic shockwave. It was the lead story on every news channel, the front page of every paper. At St. Jude's, the mood was one of cautious, disbelieving jubilation. No one could quite believe it was real. Lily became an unlikely hero. The other children looked at her with a new respect, and Mrs. Gable hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. But Lily didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired and sad. She hadn't wanted to hurt Mr. Finch. Not really. She had just wanted him to see them, to see that they mattered. Later that day, Mrs. Gable called Lily into her office. "Alistair Finch is coming here," she said, her expression a mixture of anxiety and awe. "He wants to meet with us. He wants to meet with you." Lily's heart sank. She didn't want to see him again, but she knew she had to. When the sleek black car pulled up in front of St. Jude's, Alistair Finch got out alone. He was not the imperious, cold man from the tower or the public forum. He looked humbled, tired, and deeply sad. He walked up the cracked steps and met Mrs. Gable in the doorway. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, his voice quiet. He was led into a small, cluttered sitting room. Lily was waiting for him, perched on the edge of a worn floral armchair. She looked small and vulnerable, not like the giant slayer from the night before. Alistair stood before her, his hands clasped awkwardly. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "What you did last night," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "was the bravest thing I have ever seen." Lily just looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I came here to apologize," he continued, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "I was cruel to you. I was wrong. There is no excuse for my behavior, in my office or in my plans for this neighborhood. I was a man lost in grief, and I chose to make the world as ugly as I felt inside. You showed me how wrong I was." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the watch. He had retrieved it from the auditorium evidence locker that morning. He held it out to her. "This belongs to you," he said. "You rescued it. You understood it. I forfeited any right to it." Lily looked at the watch, then back at his face. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the deep well of pain he was only just beginning to confront. She shook her head. "It's not mine," she said softly. "It belongs to her, to your constant star." The words, spoken with such simple, profound understanding, finally broke him. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, then another. He sank into the chair opposite her, the powerful billionaire completely undone by a 10-year-old orphan. He sat there and wept, not with rage or self-pity, but with the clean, agonizing pain of a heart that was finally starting to thaw. Lily, seeing not a monster but a man drowning in sorrow, did something extraordinary. She got up, walked over to him, and placed her small hand on his arm. A simple, compassionate touch that offered more comfort than 1,000 words. That meeting was the beginning of a transformation. Alistair Finch did not just save St. Jude's, he rebuilt it. He established the Eleanor Finch Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting underprivileged children across the city, and he poured hundreds of millions of dollars into it. He funded new schools, community centers, and scholarship programs. But his most significant investment was not financial. He started investing his time. He became a regular visitor at St. Jude's. At first, it was awkward. The children were wary of the sad man in the fancy suit. But slowly, they began to warm to him. He would read stories, help with homework, and listen to their problems. He learned their names, their hopes, their fears. He was especially drawn to Lily. He saw in her an intelligence and a resilience that amazed him. He learned about her closet workshop, and instead of finding it strange, he was captivated. He brought her books on engineering and horology. He took her to museums and science centers. They would spend hours talking, the Billionaire and the Orphan, finding a strange and wonderful kinship. He learned about her past, about the parents she barely remembered, about her deep-seated loneliness. And she learned about his. He told her stories about Eleanor, about their life together, about the gaping hole she had left behind. In sharing his grief, he found it lessened. In sharing her life, she found she was no longer so alone. One sunny afternoon, they were sitting in the newly renovated St. Jude's garden, a vibrant oasis of flowers and vegetable patches that had replaced a cracked concrete lot. Alistair had the watch in his hand. It had become a sort of touchstone for them. "You know," he said, turning it over in his palm, "Eleanor and I could never have children. It was the one great sadness of our lives." Lily looked at him, her expression serious. "I never really had parents," she said quietly. "Not that I can remember." They sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken truth hanging in the air between them. Alistair looked at this remarkable, brilliant, compassionate girl who had saved him from himself. She had not just fixed his wife's watch. She had fixed his life. He knew what he had to do. It was the most terrifying and most logical thing in the world. "Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "how would you feel about coming to live with me? Not as a guest, as a daughter." Lily's eyes widened, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked completely, utterly speechless. Tears welled up, but this time they were not tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She didn't say anything. She just launched herself at him, wrapping her thin arms around his neck in a fierce, desperate hug. Alistair held her tight, a feeling of profound, unconditional love filling the empty spaces in his heart. He was no longer a ghost in his own life. He was a father. He had found his way home. His constant star had sent him a new one. A year later, Alistair and Lily stood in a bright, airy workshop he had built for her on the second floor of the penthouse. It wasn't a closet. It was a state-of-the-art space, with every tool she could ever dream of. On a velvet stand in the center of her workbench sat Eleanor's watch, its gentle ticking a steady, comforting presence in their lives. It was no longer a symbol of grief or shame. It was a symbol of their beginning, a reminder that even the most broken things can be repaired, that treasure can be found in the trash, and that the most unlikely people can build a family. Alistair watched as Lily, her brow furrowed in concentration, used a pair of tweezers to place a microscopic gear into a complex clockwork mechanism she was building from scratch. She was happy, she was loved, she was home, and Alistair Finch, the man who once threw away love, had finally learned how to hold on to it. Thank you for joining us for this story. If you were touched by the journey of Lily and Alistair, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming and inspirational tales. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite moment? Until next time, remember that a little bit of kindness can fix even the most broken things.